You know you need to stock your prepper pantry, but what's the best possible thing you can stock it with? Stick around and find out. Hey guys, it's Jara with Wicked Prepared. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm sharing another meal in a jar recipe. So many people have fallen in love with meals in a jar, and it's easy to see why they've become so popular. They tick all the boxes. People have really started taking a serious look at what is in so much of the food that we buy these days and realizing how badly some of those ingredients can affect our health. People want to go back to the days when we made things from scratch with simple, clean ingredients so that we could feel good about what we were eating. But people are busy, busier today than ever before. At the same time, we've also had a big wake-up call over the last 5 years or so, over and over again, about why we need to have a good supply of shelf-stable food in our homes at all times. We've seen it over and over again. Supply chain breakdowns, pandemics, storms and weather events that are getting more and more frequent and destructive, earthquakes and wildfires, rising prices, and job loss. I could really go on and on. People see the importance of being prepared and having food on hand, but at the same time, they want a better way than beans and rice and Spam and packaged foods full of chemicals and bioengineered ingredients. Meals in a jar can be a solution to all of these things. They're meals made from scratch with ingredients that you choose and you control, that you can make in bulk when you have the time and you can get the ingredients on sale. Unlike traditional meal prepping, they can be shelf stable for years. So whether you need them next week or next year, or even 3 years from now, they'll be there for you. They cook up extremely quickly, and all you have to add is water, meaning they're great for emergencies and power outages just as much as they are for busy weeknights when you just need a quick supper to keep you out of the drive-thru or the snack drawer. The meal I'm making today is going to be a burrito in a jar. It's a hearty, delicious meal that will fill you up and keep you going when you need it the most. You'll be amazed at how easy these are to put together. Stay tuned until the end of the video and I will share my 4 favorite ways to get a meal on the table, even on the busiest of days. All right, let's get started on the burrito in a jar. For this burrito in a jar, I'm going to be using a quart-sized mason jar, and a wide mouth is what you want to use because that makes it a lot easier to get things in. And I also use a canning funnel to get things in as well. I'm going to start with the meat today. I have got some diced beef, freeze-dried diced beef. But the beauty of this meal is that it can also be mix and match. You could really use any meat or protein that you have and that you want to use, or whatever you can get on sale, or whatever you have to use up. So I'm going to be doing 2 versions today. I'm going to be doing a beef and a chicken. So we'll have beef burritos and chicken burritos. These are the 2 meats that I got on sale this month. Now I do have a pretty sizable stockpile of freeze-dried food. So when I make these meals, I go shopping from my stockpile. So that helps keep things rotated. But I know that these items are on sale, and so I can restock them at a better price. Because it's important to use the food you're storing, but it's also important to restock it when you use it, or else you'll eventually end up with nothing. So I am going to be using a second jar, and I have a second funnel, so I don't have to move it back and forth. I just think that makes it easier. I'm going to be using 1 cup of the meat today. So I've got a cup of the diced beef. And I wiped out my measuring cup, and I'm going to do a cup of the diced grilled chicken as well. Next, I'm going to do some instant white rice. Now you can use instant white rice or instant brown rice if you wanted a little bit of extra fiber. Jar meals can be made with regular long grain rice, but I find that anytime I've tested it with both, I prefer it with instant rice. It cooks so much more quickly, which is especially important in emergencies. It really just needs to go into the boiling water and basically soak for 10 or 15 minutes. But I also find the longer cooking time with the long grain rice kind of makes the rest of the ingredients suffer because everything else is freeze-dried and instant, and so it doesn't need that long of a cooking time. So I tend to use instant rice with my jar meals. I'm also going to be using a cup of the instant rice. Just a cup in there. And a cup in there. Now you can see how simple it is to multiply these recipes. Once you get your jars laid out, it doesn't take much more time to scoop the same ingredient into multiple jars as it does into just one. Just line up your jars, scoop and dump down the line, and it'll be super quick. I do recommend always making each recipe at least once and testing it out on your family just to make sure you like it as much as the person who created the recipe does, because everyone has different tastes. And you can also adjust things if you find it's too salty or not salty enough, or you want to make some little adjustments here and there. You can do that. And then once you've got it tweaked to your perfect taste, then you can make it in bulk. It doesn't make sense to fill your pantry with a whole bunch of jars of a meal that you're not sure you'll like. Next, I'm going to be adding black beans, and these are instant black beans, which means they've been cooked and then dehydrated, so they will come back to life super quickly. They really just need a soak, mostly just like the rice. And so that makes it perfect for emergency situations and for quick and easy meals like these. It actually makes me question why people always have beans and rice as their top storage food. And I have heard from a lot of people, especially recently in some of the recent disasters we've had, that that was the food that they did not cook, because it took a lot of fuel to cook dry beans that weren't instant, and a lot of people weren't familiar with cooking them to begin with. So you want to make sure you're filling your prepper pantry with things that you reasonably are going to cook in an emergency situation. So for the black beans, I'm going to do 3/4 cup. So I'm starting here with a 1/2 cup. And now I'm going to add the extra 1/4 cup. And it looks like I'm going to have to get another can of beans from the storage. And what I am going to do with these, because it looks like they're already getting pretty full, but you can see that the rice will start to filter down into these spaces down here in the meat. That's why I will sometimes put a bulkier ingredient down on the bottom and then put a smaller ingredient above it. So I'm going to give these a little bit of shaking and tapping just to get those ingredients worked down in so we have more room in the jar. Now I'm going to go ahead and add some of my powdered ingredients and seasonings so that they can do the same things with the beans and start to filter down into the spaces. I'm going to start with tomato powder. Now this is just tomatoes, absolutely nothing else in this jar besides tomatoes that have been dried and powdered. I'm going to be adding 1 tablespoon of the tomato powder. Next, I'm going to add some lime juice powder. This adds a great lime flavor. I love lime flavor, so I prefer this with 2 teaspoons of lime juice powder. However, that does make it pretty limey, so if you're not a lime-loving person like me, you might want to start by using a little bit less and then add some more if you decide that you can stand a little bit more. So I'm going to show this with 1 teaspoon. But you could add up to an additional teaspoon if you like lime, or you could just allow people to add lime juice powder after if they like a little bit more, or if you happen to have fresh limes or lime juice, a bottled lime juice, you can use that at the time of serving. I'm also going to use some chicken bouillon. I'm adding a tablespoon of chicken bouillon. Now I know that might seem like a lot, but remember that a teaspoon of bouillon makes a cup of broth. So this is really only about 3 cups of broth worth. And I'm adding more water than that to this recipe. So it's not as much as it seems like, but if it's too much for you, you can feel free to cut that down. Next, I'm going to use some ancho chili powder. Now, if you don't have this and you don't want to buy it, you can use just regular chili powder. I'm going to use a teaspoon of this. Now, these are my spice containers that measure a 1/4 teaspoon with every click of the dial. This is the newer version that I just got to try. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you've probably seen me use this version, which I've had for many, many years. It's the same company, just a different version. I was going to try these and see how I like them. So a teaspoon is going to be 4 clicks of the dial. 1, 2, 3, 4. Next, I'm adding a 1/2 teaspoon of onion powder. And a 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder. A 1/2 teaspoon of smoked paprika. And a 1/2 teaspoon of cumin. These are my old dispensers, which work similarly, but I might actually prefer these. I'm not sure yet. So that's all of our seasonings. I'm going to go ahead and settle these down as well. And next I'm going to add some freeze-dried chopped onion. 2 tablespoons of the chopped onion, which is the same as 1/8 of a cup. So I like to use 1/8 of a cup measure because I only have to scoop once. But if you don't have one of those, you can use 2 tablespoons. I'm doing the same with some mixed bell pepper. Now this is dehydrated bell pepper. This is the only it's the only vegetable in this dish that is dehydrated. Other than the beans and the rice, this is the only dehydrated item. So I've got 2 tablespoons or 1/8 of a cup of those as well. There is a difference with dehydrated and freeze-dried. Dehydrated shrinks and shrivels, so it will swell a little bit as it's rehydrating. Whereas freeze-dried just stays the same size and shape that it was when it went in fresh. So if you use freeze-dried peppers, you would want to try to get a little bit more in than 2 tablespoons. Next, I'm going to add some green chilies. Now these are mild green chilies. They're not spicy. They just give it a lot of good flavor. I've got a little bit here in my measuring cup that I dumped out of the bottom when I refilled this container, just to get the old stuff all completely out. So I'm just going to fill up this 1/4 cup measure the rest of the way. So there's a 1/4 cup of the green chilies. And next I'm going to add some refried beans. So these are instant refried beans. So they are basically dehydrated refried beans or mashed pinto beans. So these are going to add they're going to make it kind of all stick together and be like a really stick to your ribs, hearty sort of filling. And since this is a burrito filling, it's going to help hold everything together so that it doesn't just fall out of your burrito like it might if it was just very loose rice and loose beans with all those other things. So this is going to help make it more cohesive, and it's going to add some good flavor and some good nutrition to it as well. I'm adding 1/2 of a cup of the refried beans. You can see this is getting pretty full, but never fear, there's more room in there than you think. I am going to shake and tap to settle it. You can see when you pull out the funnel here, there is quite a bit more room than it looks like there because we have one more ingredient, and that is diced tomato, freeze-dried diced tomato. I'm also adding 1/2 a cup of this. Now these can be mashed down if you need to, but you can see that pretty much just fills it right up to the top. So now these are all ready to go on the shelf. We just need to seal them up. So to do that, I'm going to add a 200 cc oxygen absorber to the top of the jar and place the sealing lid. Now those oxygen absorbers are what are going to allow these meals to be shelf stable for years and years. You do want to make sure to leave the rings on when you're sealing with oxygen absorbers. It's different than pressure canning, a lot easier than pressure canning too, as you can see. And you also want to protect these jars from light. You don't want to keep them on an open shelf. Keep them in a dark cupboard or a dark closet, pantry, under your bed, somewhere like that, to protect the vegetable ingredients from light, which can degrade the nutrients. So here we have got a beef burrito filling and a chicken burrito filling. Before I get to cooking one of these up to show you how easy it is and what it looks like when it's done, I wanted to answer some questions first that I get all the time about meals in a jar. I get a lot of questions about the ingredients that I use for my jar meals. Some people assume you have to have a home freeze dryer to be able to make meals in a jar like these, which absolutely isn't true. Of course, if you do have a freeze dryer at home, you can certainly use ingredients that you freeze dried yourself, as long as you've been doing it long enough to be confident in the quality of the foods that you're freeze drying, because I've been hearing from a lot of people lately who thought that the food they had put up was dry, only to find out when they've opened them up more recently that it wasn't truly dry and the food's no longer good. So all it takes is one little piece in the jar that's not fully dry and it would ruin your whole jar. So if you're experienced and confident in your freeze drying, then of course you can use your own ingredients. But the vast majority of people who are making these recipes actually don't have a home freeze dryer. They just purchase their ingredients to be able to take advantage of the benefits of meals in a jar and the benefits of freeze-dried food without the commitment of owning a freeze dryer. I get a lot of questions about where I get my ingredients. I'll always list all of my sources down below every video to help people find what they're looking for and to know which brands I'm using of each particular product, because sometimes there are differences between brands and it does sometimes make a difference. For my freeze-dried ingredients, which is what I get by far the most questions about, I get my ingredients from one company pretty much exclusively, and that's why I can feel so confident that the meals I put together are so clean and so high quality, because this company is known for their clean food and their high quality standards. They don't allow GMOs or bioengineered ingredients or any artificial flavors, colors, or chemicals in their food. They have a quality control process that starts on the farms, in the fields, and follows the food all the way through the harvesting and the freeze drying process, all the way to the cans, to make sure that it's the highest quality, most nutritious, and cleanest product on the market. When we discovered this food, it completely changed our prepping game. I knew I owed it to my family to have this food in my home. Now, if you're a regular viewer of the channel, you know that I am always looking for the best deal. So what I discovered was that the best way for me to get the food for the lowest cost was to become a consultant for the company, which I did 5 years ago now. And it's actually only gotten better since then, because now they actually have a free food program that gives consultants free credit back on every order they place. So it's really helped us build a pantry full of clean food that we feel good about eating, and that actually makes it easier to eat clean on an everyday basis as well. So if you're interested in meals in a jar, or switching over to a cleaner, healthier pantry, or even just building up the ultimate prepper pantry at a discount, look down below for the link to follow, or send me a text if you have any questions, and I would love to answer them for you. All right, now let's make some burritos. Now, really, this is a burrito filling. So to make it a complete burrito, you're going to need tortillas. So if you're just using this for a convenience meal, maybe if you're like me, you always have tortillas in your fridge all the time, or you have the ingredients on hand to make tortillas, which isn't very difficult. They do sell this, which is a just add water flour tortilla mix. If you look at the instructions here, it says you just need a half a cup of warm water and 2 cups of this mix. So you could throw 2 cups of this into a pint jar and store it alongside of your burrito filling if you'd like. There's also other ways to enjoy this. You could just put this into a bowl and have it as a burrito bowl. You could have some chips with it and all kinds of toppings if you have that kind of thing. But do think about how you're going to have tortillas if you want to make burritos. Now I'm going to show you how these come together into a meal, and I'm going to be using my butane burner to demonstrate. This is what we prefer to use in a power outage or an emergency situation if we have to cook our food when our electric stove isn't working. So I'm just going to cook one of these up because they're both going to cook up the same way. So I think today I'm going to do the chicken because we just recently had beef burritos, and so we'll have something a little different. I'm just going to be using a medium saucepan. You're going to want a pan with a lid, and I'm going to start by opening my jar and removing that oxygen absorber. And then I'm going to go ahead and empty this jar right into the pan. Oh, that smells so good. I'm going to be using 3 1/4 cups of water for this recipe, and I am going to start by pouring the water into my mason jar, just because I like to make sure that there aren't any bits of powder or bits of ingredients left stuck inside the jar, and that we get all of that goodness out into our meal. All right, so I've got my 3 1/4 cups of water in here, and then my camera ran out of space, so I had to take a little pause, and that kind of made me realize and think to tell you that this meal actually could be a cold soak meal, which is a trick that a lot of backpackers use if they don't want to have to carry a lot of fuel. For instance, meals like this, you could, if you were desperate and hungry and you didn't have fuel, or you didn't have a stove, or something like that, in an emergency, you could cold soak this. It would take longer, but it would work. But I have got my 3 1/4 cups of water in. I'm going to put the lid on that. Put my fuel in my stove and turn this on. I'm going to turn it on medium high, and I'm just going to bring it up to a simmer. And at that point, I'm going to lower the heat, let it simmer for 5 minutes, and then let it sit off the heat for another 10 minutes or so, and then it should be done. Very quick and simple to cook these meals. All right, so this is starting to simmer. I am going to give it another stir. You do have to be a little bit careful with this one. I think it's because of the refried beans. It can stick on the bottom a little bit more than some other dishes. So I'm going to give it a stir, and turn the heat right down. Also, I've noticed sometimes if I don't stir it enough, those refried beans can really kind of gather in the corners of the pot and not be evenly distributed throughout the dish. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn this down so this can just simmer for 5 minutes, and then it'll be ready to turn off. All right, it has been simmering now for 5 minutes. I'm going to turn the heat off. I'm going to go ahead and give it one more stir, and then it's going to set covered for another 10 minutes, and that should be all it needs to be ready to go. If you were in a desperate situation with very little fuel, you could just bring this up to a hard boil, turn it off, and just let it sit a little longer, especially if you wrap the pot in something that can kind of insulate it and hold the heat in. It would be just fine. All right, it's been 10 minutes. Let's see how this is looking. It is looking pretty done. So what we're going to want to test is a chunk of the meat to make sure that that has gotten softened all the way through, hydrated all the way through, and a bean. Those are the two that would take the longest. Those are perfectly done. So it's time now to put together a burrito. Now, I have got to admit, I am not a very good burrito roller. My family gets some pretty sketchy looking burritos. So I'm not going to be showing off any kind of a flex here, but I'm going to just do my best. Just going to scoop on some of our filling. Now, typically with a meal like this, a quart-sized jar meal, I would typically get 3 to 4 servings from that usually. It depends on how big people's appetites are and things like that. But with a meal like this, because you're using it as a filling, and I'm going to be putting some toppings on it, you probably will get a lot more servings, feed a lot more people with a meal like this. Now, what my family really likes to have on our burritos is we like to have some pico. Now, if you were in an emergency situation, you wouldn't have toppings like this, but I do have actually a recipe for basically like a pico in a jar, or a salsa in a jar that you could also use with this. We also like sour cream with it. You can make sour cream out of canned media crema and a little bit of vinegar if you do not have sour cream. I could not imagine eating food like this without sour cream. And the other thing that my family likes to put in our burritos is like a Frito type of corn chip, just for a little bit of crunch. Like Taco Bell used to have their Frito burritos, and that was a favorite guilty pleasure of ours. So let's see. I think my problem is I tend to make them too big. Too much filling. So there is my very unprofessionally rolled burrito. Like I said, I do not do that very well. See if we can cut this in half. And there's our chicken burrito. It looks delicious. It might fall apart, but it's going to look and taste delicious. I cannot wait to dig into this. That's good. That's a winner. I hope you love this new meal in a jar recipe as much as we do. I promise to share with you my 4 favorite ways to get a meal on the table when I don't really have time to cook. 2 of these are also a big part of our emergency preparedness food security plan. The first one is what I just showed you today, meals in a jar. We have a whole collection of meal in a jar recipes on our channel that cover everything from breakfast to supper to dessert. You can easily build a menu of several weeks or even several months worth of emergency convenience meals. The next way is meals in a bag or emergency meal kits. These bags contain everything you need to make a complete meal from 100% shelf-stable ingredients, and I even include any water needed to prepare the meal. Just grab a bag off the shelf and follow the instructions included to throw together a meal in no time. Comparing these two shelf-stable methods, meals in a bag tend to make more servings, but they are a bit more involved to prepare and they create a lot more mess in terms of empty packaging that you have to dispose of. With the jar meals, you only end up with one empty jar that can be washed and reused. Meals in a bag also usually can't be scaled down for smaller families. Whereas with meals in a jar, you could always grab a second jar if you needed more servings, but you can also cut the recipe in half and make it in a pint jar to serve less people. I've even cut them down to single servings. Meals in a bag also tend to contain more undesirable ingredients because they do rely heavily on canned and packaged foods. Whereas most of the ingredients for the jar meals come from our favorite sources for clean food with no GMOs, additives, or preservatives. But the meals in a bag are still a great tool to have in the pantry and the prepper pantry. It's still a home-cooked meal that has to be better than McDonald's or starving. We also have a playlist full of meal in a bag recipes that you can check out if you think you'd like to incorporate some of these into your pantry. The next two ways are not emergency prep friendly as they do rely on the power grid and you could lose it all in a power outage, but they're still convenient options for busy days during good times. The first is freezer meals. Putting together a few casseroles or crock pot meals and tossing them into the freezer to pull out on a day that I need an easy meal is another way I can get supper for my family even when we're really busy. Some people will have these marathon sessions where they create dozens or hundreds of meals maybe all in 1 or 2 days and just completely stock their freezers, but it doesn't have to be that involved. Sometimes what I'll do is just double a recipe that I'm making anyways, so I have one extra to throw it in the freezer. You can really do it on any scale that you want. You can get a programmable crock pot to help out with cooking them. I used to also use the delay start and timed bake functions on my oven to bake my casseroles while we were out for the afternoon into the evening. I always used to say, now, if only they would make an oven that could refrigerate the food all day and then bake it at night. Which brings me to the fourth way that I get meals on the table when I don't have time to cook. I kind of felt like that wish got answered when I discovered my latest kitchen appliance, which is called a sous vide. And it has 2 separate compartments that can each be set separately to cook like a different time, temperature, method. It's got like 15 different cooking methods it can do. Everything from baking to broiling to steaming to slow cook. It's got sous vide. And the one I have is the 3.0 plus, so it also has air fry. But what really sold me on it is that it also refrigerates. So you can have it refrigerate your food and then switch to cooking. You can set the time that you want your meal to be done anytime the day that you're doing it or the next day. I think it's up to 36 hours out that you can set it to cook. So like you could put in breakfast the night before to be done the next morning, or you could put your dinner in before you leave for work in the morning, or even the night before. I've been using mine for a few weeks now and I'm loving it. I can also use it in conjunction with the freezer meals that I just mentioned. They offered a deal when I bought my appliance and it included a deal for some of their meals. They have their own frozen meals. And there was an agreement with the special price that I got that I'd buy a certain number of meals within a year. But what a lot of people do, because like any meal service, the meals are kind of spendy. So what a lot of people do and what I'm planning to do also is fulfill the meal purchase requirement and then switch to cooking my own meals in it. You can cook whatever you want in it. So I got an extra set of pans so I could put together my own freezer meals to use in the machine. Although as we've tried the meals, we've really enjoyed most of them, actually all but one so far. So I think that we are going to probably make a habit of keeping a few of these meals on hand for the ultimate convenience. And it's actually really, really cool. It's my favorite feature of the whole thing because all of the meals come with a recipe card and it has a little sticker on it. And if you scan the sticker to the machine, it instantly puts in all of the cooking instructions that it needs to cook the meal for you. You just schedule the time you want and put how many servings you're making and if you're cooking it from frozen, and then it knows everything else. One other thing that's great about all 4 of these ways that I told you about is that they're all something that my kids can easily do. My kids are getting older now, so they can do this as well. They can either help with supper for everyone, or more importantly, they have a really good option, lots of really good options for easily feeding themselves if I'm not home. I hope you've gotten some helpful info from this video, or at the very least gotten some entertainment out of it. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a burrito emoji down in the comments below and check out this video next for a guide on how to fill the perfect prepper pantry. I'm Jara with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.